the Lufthansa heist. The most infamous airport robbery in American history. The seeds of a criminal masterpiece. On the frigid night of December 11, 1978, as most New Yorkers were preparing for the holiday season, a group of men gathered in Robert's Lounge, a smoky bar in South Ozone Park, Queens. The establishment, owned by James "Jimmy the Gent" Burke, served as an unofficial headquarters for a faction of the Lucchese crime family. Tonight the conversation was hushed but animated, centering around information provided by a cargo handler named Louis Werner. Werner, a gambling addict deeply in debt to Burke's associates, has revealed something extraordinary. Millions in untraceable cash regularly passed through the Lufthansa cargo terminal at JFK Airport. Werner knew the operation intimately. He had worked there for 8 years. He knew about a particular shipment arriving soon. Currency being returned to the United States from Germany, used by American military personnel and tourists. The shipment would contain millions in cash that had already cleared customs in Germany, making it virtually untraceable. Burke, a ruthless and meticulous criminal mastermind, listened intently. His eyes gleamed with possibility as Werner described the terminal's layout, security protocols, and the movement patterns of guards. This would unbeat Burke's first airport heist. He had orchestrated several at JFK before, but this would dwarf them all. The planning began that very night, with Burke recruiting a team of trusted associates from his criminal network. Each man was selected for specific skills, and each would receive only the information necessary for his particular role. Burke was paranoid about leaks, and with good reason. The bigger the score, the looser the lips. The planning. Over the following weeks, Burke's basement in South Ozone Park became the nerve center for what would become the most ambitious heist in American history. The walls were covered with diagrams of the Lufthansa cargo building, schedules, and duty rosters, all information provided by Werner and another inside man, Peter Grunwald, a cargo transfer agent who had access to the vault combinations. Burke's team included Jimmy the Gent Burke, the mastermind Henry Hill, associate and liaison, Tommy DeSimone, Burke's right-hand enforcer, Angelo Seep, experienced heistman Tony Rodriguez, driver and lookout Joe Buda, Manry, airport expert Robert Frenchie McMahon, electronics specialist Paolo Lacostri, Sicilian-born gunman Louis Cafera, wheelman. The planning was meticulous. Burke insisted on knowing everything from the cargo terminal's staffing patterns to the response time of Port Authority police. Through Werner and Grunwald, he learned that the shipment would arrive on December 11th, with an estimated $5 million in cash. The currency would be stored overnight in a vault before being transferred to the Federal Reserve. Burke personally drove the planned routes multiple times, timing each segment. He selected vehicles with Cara Ford Econoline van as the primary transport and several switch cars to confuse potential witnesses. License plates were stolen from long-term airport parking to further obscure their trail. Each team member received specific instructions. Some would control the employees, others would load the money, and designated drivers would handle various phases of the escape. Burke established strict rules: no unnecessary violence, no personal identification, and most importantly, no discussion of the heist with anyone outside the crew. In the week leading up to the heist, the team rehearsed their roles. Burke timed each segment of the operation, insisting they shave seconds off each task until the entire heist could theoretically be completed in under 30 minutes. The night before, December 10th, the team gathered one final time. Burke issued black jumpsuits, ski masks, and gloves to each man. The weapons. 38 caliber revolvers with filed-off serial numbers were distributed. Communication would be minimal during the operation, with predetermined code words for emergencies. Tomorrow night, Burke told them, we're going to be rich beyond your wildest dreams. The execution, the night of December 11th, 1978. At precisely 3:12 a.m. on December 11th, 1978, a black Ford Econoline van with stolen New York plates pulled up to the employee entrance of Building 261, the Lufthansa cargo terminal at JFK Airport. The temperature hovered around 28 degrees Fahrenheit, and a light fog had settled over the tarmac, reducing visibility to less than 100 yards, conditions that Burke had specifically waited for based on weather forecasts. Inside the van were 6 men. Jimmy Burke, though most definitive accounts suggest he stayed behind as the coordinator at a nearby Howard Beach diner. Tommy Two Gun, Disimoni, Angelo Seep, Paolo Licastri, Joe Budamanri, and Robert Frenchie McMahon. All wore identical black jumpsuits purchased from an Army-Navy surplus store in Brooklyn 2 weeks earlier. Their faces were concealed behind ski masks, and each man wore 2 layers of surgical gloves to prevent fingerprints while maintaining dexterity. Each carried a .38 caliber Smith & Wesson revolver with the serial numbers removed using hydrochloric acid weapons that Burke had sourced from an arms dealer in Pennsylvania specifically for this job. Outside, Tony Rodriguez and Louis Roastbeef Cafara waited in separate vehicles, a stolen champagne-colored 1977 Buick Electra and a dark blue Mercedes. 300 depositioned strategically at predetermined points along South Conduit Avenue for the escape. The cars had been stolen 3 days earlier from long-term parking at LaGuardia Airport and fitted with license plates taken from junkyards. The timing was calculated to the minute. Through Louis Werner, Burke had learned that Monday's early morning hours between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. represented the perfect window. Shift change occurred at 3 a.m. The security guards would be completing their rounds, and the night staff would be minimal. Most critically, the weekend-'s currency shipments would still be in the vault, before Monday morning's scheduled transfer to the Federal Reserve. Their inside man, Peter Grunwald, had disengaged a specific alarm. Sensor on loading dock #5's service door, a seemingly minor security breach. That maintenance had been notified about, but hadn't yet repaired. The door was accessible via a chain-link fence that the team cut through using bolt cutters, creating an opening just large enough for a man to slip through. Disimoni and Seep entered first, moving silently through the freight area with the aid of terminal floor plans memorized during weeks of preparation. As they approached the employee parking area, they encountered Kerry Whalen, Lufthansa cargo agent who was taking his 3:15 a.m. coffee break in his car. Disimoni approached the driver's side, while Seep covered the passenger door. When Whalen rolled down his window, Disimoni struck him with the butt of his revolver, the first deviation from Burke's no excessive violence directive. Blood streaming from his forehead, Whalen was forced to the ground, where his wrists were bound with plastic flex cuffs, and he was walked back inside through the service entrance. Meanwhile, Licastri and Manry breached the terminal through the main employee entrance, using a key provided by Werner. They moved methodically through the corridors, disabling 2 security cameras by spray-painting their lenses with black paint and cutting the wires to a third. At exactly 3:21 a.m., they reached the employee break room, where 3 cargo handlers were having coffee: John Murray, Rolf Redman, and Richard Fasanaro. All 3 were forced to the floor, bound, and their employee ID badges confiscated. The most crucial target was Rudy Eyrich, the night shift supervisor, who had access to the vault combinations. McMahon and Disimoni located him in the operations office, reviewing manifests. Following their rehearsed script, Disimoni placed his gun against Eyrich's neck, while McMahon explained the situation. "We know everything about you," McMahon told him, reciting details about Eyrich's family and home address information provided by Werner. "Cooperate, and nobody gets hurt. Make trouble, and your family will suffer." Eyrich, a 40-year veteran of Lufthansa, with a wife and 3 children, quickly assessed his options and chose to cooperate. "I'll do whatever you ask," he said, his German accent pronounced under stress. "Just don't hurt anyone." The robbers systematically gathered all staff now, totaling 7 employees, and herded them into the break room. Each person was bound with flex cuffs at wrists and ankles, had duct tape placed over their eyes and mouth, and was positioned facing the wall. McMahon stood guard with explicit instructions from Burke. "Anyone moves, shoot them in the leg. No killing." With the employees secured, Seep and Disimoni escorted Eyrich to the main security office. Under their direction, he disabled the alarm system by entering his supervisor code into the control panel 26501, and then led them to the vault area. The vault itself was a reinforced concrete room with a die-bolt combination lock requiring 2 separate combinations. Eyrich provided his combination for the first lock, and then, using information from Grunwald that Werner had passed to Burke, Disimoni entered the second combination, 731982. The heavy vault door swung open to reveal stacks of currency stored in sealed pouches, marked Deutsche Bundesbank, and American currency returned. The bills were organized in denominations ranging from $5 to $100, many still wrapped in the original Federal Reserve bands. Adjacent to the cache were several boxes containing watches, jewelry, gold chains being shipped by German manufacturers to American distributors for the holiday season, an unexpected bonus. The team was visibly stunned by the volume. Their intelligence had suggested approximately $2 million would be present. But as they quickly assessed the contents, Seep used a pocket calculator to estimate closer to $6 million, according to later testimony from Hill. DeSimone keyed his walkie-talkie, twice the agreed-upon signal to Burke that they had hit the jackpot. Working with practiced efficiency, they loaded the cash and valuables into 6 specially reinforced canvas duffel bags with shoulder straps. Chosen specifically because they could each hold up to $1 million in cash, while still being manageable for one man to carry. They worked systematically with CIB recording serial numbers from selected bundles for later verification. Contrary to Burke's instructions to take only cash, DeSimone also emptied the jewelry boxes, adding watches, gold chains, and unmounted diamonds to their haul. The vault operation took exactly 64 minutes, 22 minutes longer than Burke had allocated, creating tension among the team. At one point, Manry checked his watch and signaled to Seep that they were behind schedule, leading to a heated whispered exchange that Irick later recalled to investigators. At 4:16 a.m., they exited through the same service door, with Lickestry sweeping their path with a handheld detector to check for silent alarms, a precaution suggested by Werner, who knew the terminal had recently upgraded some security systems. The duffel bags, now weighing nearly 50 pounds each, were loaded into the van in a specific arrangement pre-planned by Burke to distribute weight evenly for faster acceleration. The team maintained radio silence during the exit, using only hand signals they had practiced during 3 separate rehearsals in Burke's garage. One by one, they climbed into the vehicle, with DeSimone doing a final sweep, using a high-powered flashlight to ensure nothing was left behind that might identify them. He removed all the flex scuffs that had been cut off during the operation and even picked up cigarette butts that Lickestria had carelessly discarded despite explicit instructions not to smoke. The van pulled away from the terminal at exactly 4:21 a.m., proceeding at exactly 24.5 miles per hour the speed Burke had calculated would be slow enough to avoid attention, but fast enough to exit the airport grounds efficiently. As they departed, no alarms had been triggered, no shots fired, and apart from Whalen's minor head injury, no one had been seriously hurt. They left behind traumatized employees, but no communication capability. All phone lines had been cut, and the security radio disabled. What none of the robbers realized was that they had just executed not a $2 million heist as planned, but what would become known as the largest cash robbery in American history at that time: $5.875 million in cash, and approximately $875,000 in jewelry. The Lufthansa heist had just made criminal history, the elaborate escape. Burke's escape plan demonstrated his criminal genius refined through decades of successful heists, rather than a simple point-to-point getaway. He had designed a complex 6-stage withdrawal operation involving multiple vehicle switches, decoy movements, and route changes, specifically engineered to defeat both immediate pursuit and subsequent investigation. Stage 1 began immediately upon exiting the Lufthansa terminal. The van, driven by Manry, who had previously worked as a professional truck driver, proceeded north on the JFK expressway, maintaining precisely 3 miles per hour below the speed limit. Not enough to clear the airport quickly, but not fast enough to attract attention. Airport security cameras recorded the van passing through the north cargo exit gate at 4:27 a.m., but the stolen license plates rendered this information useless to investigators. The team maintained strict radio silence during this phase, communicating only through prearranged hand signals. Their police scanner, monitored by McMahon, confirmed no alarm had yet been raised. The first Port Authority police broadcast about the robbery wouldn't come till 5:32 a.m., giving the team over an hour's head start. At 4:43 a.m., the van reached the first designated switch point, a closed gas station in Canarsie, Brooklyn, that Burke's associate Parnell Stacks Edwards had arranged access to through its owner. The location had been chosen for 3 specific advantages. It was indoors and shielded from street view, had multiple exit routes, and was in a neighborhood where police patrols were infrequent during early morning hours. Here, the operation entered Stage 2. The team transferred the money bags to 2 waiting vehicles: a stolen champagne-colored Buick Electra driven by Rodriguez and Cafara's dark blue Mercedes 300D. The cash was divided unevenly, with approximately $4 million going into the Mercedes and the remainder into the Buick. The jewelry was placed in a separate briefcase and given to Kafara. The vehicles departed at 3-minute intervals, taking separate pre-planned routes. The Buick headed toward Manhattan via the Brooklyn Bridge, while the Mercedes took the longer but less surveilled route through Queens toward the Whitestone Bridge. Meanwhile, Burke's associate Stax Edwards was tasked with taking the van to a junkyard in New Jersey, where it would be compacted and destroyed. However, in the first major breach of the plan, Edwards instead drove the van to his girlfriend's apartment, where he parked it on the street, a critical error that would later provide investigators with valuable evidence. The main team proceeded to Stage 3, the first cash consolidation point at Angelo, Seep's girlfriend's apartment in Ozone Park, Queens. By 5:30 a.m., both vehicles had arrived safely. With the security of closed blinds and police scanners monitoring emergency frequencies, the team did its first money count. The total was staggering: $5,875,000 in cash, and approximately $875,000 in jewelry, nearly 3 times their expected haul. Burke, who joined them at this location, was ecstatic but immediately concerned about the scale of the theft, recognizing it would trigger a massive investigation. He ordered an immediate acceleration of the dispersal plan, moving directly to Stage 4. The cash was divided into smaller portions and placed into nondescript shopping bags from local stores like Macy's, Alexander's, and Corvette's. Each team member was given approximately $10,000 for immediate expenses, while the bulk was consolidated into 4 suitcases. These suitcases were then transported by Burke, DeSimone, and Seep to a series of previously arranged safe houses, primarily homes of associates, relatives who had no criminal records or connections to the crew. Stage 5 involved the complex money laundering operation Burke had prepared. Starting at noon on December 11th, various associates began the process of converting the stolen currency. German marks were taken to specific currency exchange offices throughout the city in small amounts by people with legitimate passports showing recent European travel. Higher denomination U.S. bills were gradually filtered into cash-intensive legitimate businesses controlled by Burke and his associates, particularly bars, restaurants, and vending machine companies, where large cash flows wouldn't attract attention. A significant portion, estimated at $2 to $3 million, was delivered to Paul Vario, the Lucchese family capo who provided protection for Burke's crew. This payment, larger than originally planned, was necessary given the high profile the heist would soon attain. The final stage complete disappearance of the team proved the most problematic. Burke instructed all participants to maintain absolute silence and normal routines, while living modestly for at least 6 months. The money was to remain untouched in its various hiding places until the investigation cooled down. Within 24 hours of the robbery, the cash and valuables had been dispersed to at least 18 different locations across 4 states. The vehicles had been abandoned or destroyed, and the participants had returned to their normal routines. All without a single arrest or even identification of a suspect. The perfect escape seemed complete. What Burke couldn't control, however, was human nature in the face of sudden wealth, a factor that would ultimately unravel his masterpiece. The investigation, untangling the web. The first indication that something was amiss came at 5:30 a.m. when Carlos Imperiali, an incoming Lufthansa employee, discovered the night shift staff bound and gagged in the break room. He immediately contacted John Murray, the terminal manager, who arrived at 5:45 a.m. and called Port Authority police. The first officers arrived at 5:58 a.m., by which time the robbers had nearly a 2-hour head start. The initial assessment stunned even veteran officers. "This wasn't a robbery, it was a military operation," remarked Port Authority Police Captain Hubert Carmichael upon seeing the methodical nature of the crime scene. The case immediately escalated beyond local authorities. By 7:30 a.m., FBI Special Agent Richard Woods had been assigned as lead investigator, working alongside NYPD Detective Kenneth McCabe. Woods, a 17-year veteran with extensive experience in organized crime investigations, recognized the sophistication immediately. "This is someone who knows what they're doing," he told his team during their first briefing. "Professional crew, inside information, perfect timing." The investigation began with forensic examination of the crime scene, which yielded frustratingly little. The perpetrators had left virtually no physical evidence, no footprints, No discarded items. The only noteworthy findings were 1. Tire impressions matching a Ford Econoline van in the service area. 2. A single cigarette butt of a Marlboro brand near the service entrance. 3. Traces of black spray paint on the disabled security cameras. 4. A small blood smear on Carey. Whalen's jacket from his head injury. The employee interviews proved more valuable. Rudy Eyrich provided detailed descriptions of 2 perpetrators whose masks had shifted during the robbery, giving partial facial details. More significantly, multiple employees noted the robbers' intimate knowledge of operations. They knew my name, they knew where I lived, they knew about the new alarm system that hadn't even been fully documented yet, Eyrich told investigators. They even knew about the shipment schedule change that only happened last week. This information immediately suggested an inside job. Attention quickly focused on current and former Lufthansa employees with access to sensitive information about shipments and security. The investigation took its first major turn when detectives learned that Louis Werner, a senior cargo agent, had recently lost over $20,000 gambling and had asked coworkers for loans to cover his debts. Werner's phone records showed multiple calls to a man named Martin Krugman, Queens hairstylist, known to have connections with bookmakers. Krugman, in turn, had connections to Jimmy Burke through Robert's Lounge, the informal headquarters of Burke's crew. The investigation's next break came on December 17th, when NYPD officers discovered the abandoned Econoline van in Canarsie with its Lufthansa cargo. Shipping paperwork still in the glove compartment. This led them to Parnell Stacks Edwards, whose fingerprints were found on the vehicle's steering wheel and who had been seen driving it after the robbery. Edwards was arrested on December 18th and immediately offered to cooperate. But before he could provide formal testimony, he was found shot to death in his apartment on December 20th, executed with 5 bullets to the head. This killing signaled to investigators that a cleanup operation was already underway. By early January 1979, the FBI had compiled a detailed organizational chart of suspects. At the top was Jimmy Burke, connected to various known associates, including Tommy DeSimone, Angelo Seep, Joe Manry, and others. Surveillance teams were assigned to monitor these subjects, while financial investigators began tracking for unexplained wealth. The investigation received another significant boost when Louis Werner was brought in for questioning on January 8, 1979. Facing overwhelming circumstantial evidence and the threat of a lengthy prison sentence, Werner began cooperating. He admitted to providing inside information about the shipment and security, details to Martin Krugman in exchange for help with his gambling debts. This testimony provided the first solid connection between the inside information and Burke's crew. While Werner's testimony was valuable, prosecutors knew they needed more to build a case against the actual robbers. They set up intensive surveillance on Burke's crew, hoping to catch them making mistakes with the money. Electronic bugs were placed in Robert's Lounge and in vehicles used by Burke and his associates. These surveillance efforts captured concerning developments. On January 6, 1979, Martin Krugman disappeared after telling his wife he was going to meet Jimmy Burke. In mid-January, Louis Cafera and his wife, Karen, vanished without a trace after being seen driving to a meeting with Burke. Their car was later found abandoned at JFK Airport. The systematic elimination of potential witnesses alarmed investigators. "He's cleaning house," Agent Woods noted in his case file. "This isn't just about hiding money anymore. It's about silencing everyone who can connect him to the heist." The investigation suffered another setback when Tommy DeSimone disappeared on January 14, 1979, though investigators later determined this was unrelated to the Lufthansa cleanup. He had been killed by the Gambino crime family for separate offenses. By spring 1979, the body count continued to rise. Richard Eaton, an associate who Burke suspected of skimming money, was found frozen and wrapped in pink plastic in a meat truck. Joe Manry and Robert McMahon were found shot to death in a Buick in Brooklyn on May 16, 1979. Paolo Licastre was found murdered in a vacant lot in Brooklyn in June. Despite the mounting evidence of Burke's involvement in these killings, prosecutors couldn't directly connect him to the Lufthansa robbery itself. The investigation reached a frustrating stalemate. They knew who had committed the crime, but couldn't prove it sufficiently for court. The breakthrough finally came from an unexpected direction. Henry Hill, a close associate of Burke, who had peripheral knowledge of the heist, was arrested on drug trafficking charges in April 1980, facing a lengthy prison sentence and convinced that Burke planned to kill him next. Hill agreed to enter the witness protection program and testify against his former associates. "Jimmy's gone nuts," Hill told investigators during his initial debriefing. "He doesn't trust anyone anymore. If you've heard anything about Lufthansa, he thinks you have to go. Next on his list, I know it." Hill's testimony provided investigators with their first comprehensive inside view of Burke's operation. He described planning meetings at Robert's Lounge, identified participants, and detailed Burke's methodology for both the robbery and the subsequent murders. Though Hill hadn't participated directly in the heist, his proximity to Burke gave his testimony immense credibility. Armed with Hill's testimony and mountains of circumstantial evidence, prosecutors began building cases against the surviving participants. Louis Werner was the first to be convicted, receiving a 15-year sentence in May 1979 for providing inside information. Peter Grunwald received a shorter sentence in exchange for cooperation, though his testimony proved less valuable than hoped. The most significant legal victory came when prosecutors used Hill's testimony to convict Jimmy Burke of the murder of Richard Eaton in 1982, resulting in a 20-year sentence, though not directly for the Lufthansa heist. This conviction effectively removed the mastermind from the streets for the remainder of his active criminal career. Additional convictions followed. Angelo Seep was indicted for murder in 1984, but was himself murdered before trial. Several of Burke's associates received sentences for related crimes including extortion, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Burke himself received additional convictions for other crimes, extending his sentence to multiple life terms. Ironically, the largest obstacle to solving the case completely was the thoroughness of Burke's cleanup operation. Nearly all direct participants in the heist were dead murdered by Burke or his associates to ensure their silence. The aftermath, blood money. The Lufthansa heist's bloody aftermath demonstrated the dark reality behind the honor among thieves myth. Jimmy Burke, paranoid and ruthless, systematically eliminated nearly everyone with direct knowledge of the robbery, creating a body count that eventually exceeded the number of participants in the actual heist. The first victim was Parnell Stacks Edwards, killed on December 20th, 1978, just 9 days after the robbery. His failure to dispose of the getaway van as instructed made him both a liability and an example to others. He was executed in his apartment by Tommy DeSimone and Angelo Seep, shot 5 times in the head with a silenced .38 caliber pistol, the same type used in the heist. Burke established a simple rule: anyone showing unexplained wealth or talking loosely about the robbery had to be eliminated. The executions were carried out with mechanical precision, usually by DeSimone, Seep, or Burke himself. Martin Krugman, the hairstylist who had provided the initial information about the Lufthansa shipment, disappeared on January 6, 1979, according to Henry Hill's later testimony. Krugman had been demanding his share approximately $500,000 more aggressively than Burke thought prudent. He was lured to a meeting at Robert's Lounge, strangled to death in the basement, and his body dismembered. His remains were never found. Richard Eaton, an associate who had helped launder some of the money, made the fatal mistake of skimming approximately $250,000 from Burke. In January 1979, Eaton was found in an abandoned freezer truck in Brooklyn, frozen solid, with his hands bound with electrical wire and wrapped in pink contact paper. His skull had been crushed, and autopsy results showed he had been brutally beaten before being left to freeze to death. The most chilling elimination involved Louis and Joanna Cafara. Louis, nicknamed Louis Roast Beef, had flagrantly violated Burke's instructions by purchasing a new pink Cadillac Coupe de Ville. Just days after the heist and parking it directly in front of Burke's home, when confronted, Cafara reportedly boasted about buying a $59,000 house in cash. "You might as well put up a billboard saying you did Lufthansa," Burke allegedly told him. The Cafaras disappeared in March 1979 after being summoned to a meeting with Burke. They were never seen again, and their bodies were never recovered. Their new Cadillac was found abandoned at JFK Airport, a final ironic touch to their disappearance. By mid-1979, the body count continued to rise. Joe Budamonri and Robert Frenchie. McMahon were found on May 16, 1979, in a parked car near a Brooklyn junkyard, each shot in the back of the head. Paolo Lacostri, the Sicilian shooter, was found murdered on June 13, 1979, his body dumped in a vacant lot in Brooklyn. Tommy DeSimone disappeared on January 14, 1979, though his death was actually ordered by the Gambino crime family for separate offenses. The fact that initially confused investigators Angelo Seep and his girlfriend were murdered in their home in 1984. Just as prosecutors were preparing to use Seep as a witness against the remaining conspirators, this systematic elimination of witnesses effectively stymied the investigation. Every time we get close to someone who can give us Burke on the Lufthansa job, they end up dead, FBI agent Woods complained to his supervisors in a July 1979 memo. As for the money, most of it disappeared into the criminal underworld. According to Hill's testimony, Burke kept approximately $2 to $3 million for himself. Using elaborate money laundering techniques to integrate it into legitimate businesses, he purchased several bars and restaurants in Queens, a small construction company, and reportedly invested in real estate through strawman buyers. A significant portion, estimated at $2 million, went to Paul Vario and other higher-ups in the Lucchese crime family as tribute. Burke also distributed smaller amounts to various associates who were directly involved in the heist, but provided peripheral support. Despite the FBI's best efforts, most of the stolen money was never recovered. Financial investigators traced approximately $27,000 to various bank accounts controlled by Burke's associates, and about $180,000 in cash was found during searches of properties linked to the crew. The remainder, over $5.5 million, effectively vanished. The investigation's most significant breakthrough came through drug charges rather than the robbery itself. Henry Hill, who had been peripherally involved in the planning but not the execution of the heist, was arrested on narcotics trafficking charges in 1980, facing decades in prison and aware that Burke was eliminating potential witnesses. Hill made the unprecedented decision to break the mafia's code of silence and cooperate with authorities. Hill and his family entered the Witness Protection Program, and his testimony proved invaluable in building cases against Burke and the surviving members of his crew, though prosecutors couldn't prove Burke's direct involvement in the Lufthansa robbery. Hill's testimony helped convict him of Richard Eaton's murder in 1982, resulting in a 20-year sentence. Burke received additional convictions for other crimes, including a 1985 conviction for basketball point-shaving schemes that added more years to his sentence. He died of lung cancer in prison in 1996. Never having revealed the location of his share of the Lufthansa money, the aftermath of the heist extended well beyond the immediate participants. The Lufthansa cargo terminal implemented comprehensive security reforms, including biometric access controls and enhanced surveillance. The FBI established a dedicated airport crimes unit that continues operating today. The case also led to improved cooperation protocols between federal agencies and local police departments for major interstate crimes. Perhaps the most unexpected development came in 2014, 36 years after the heist, when FBI agents arrested Vincent Asaro, 78-year-old Bonanna crime family captain who had never before been connected to the robbery. The case against Asaro relied heavily on testimony from his cousin, Gasper Valenti, who became a government witness in 2008 and recorded conversations in which Asaro, Ali Gedly, discussed their role in the Lufthansa job. During Asaro's 2015 trial, prosecutors presented evidence that he had been involved in planning the heist and had received a share of approximately $750,000. Despite this testimony, the jury acquitted Asaro of all charges related to the robbery, a reflection of the difficulties in prosecuting decades-old crimes with limited physical evidence. To this day, most of the stolen money has never been recovered. Some crime historians speculate that portions remain hidden in safety deposit boxes or buried at various locations around New York criminal treasure that may never be found. About security protocols, they knew exactly where to go, what to look for, Rudy Eyrich told investigators. They even knew my name. This information immediately suggested an inside job. Attention quickly focused on current and former Lufthansa employees with access to sensitive information about shipments and security. Louis Werner, with his gambling debts and history of financial problems, quickly emerged as a person of interest. Investigators also noted several telling details about the robbers' methods. They had known about a specific shipment of high value. They were familiar with the terminal's layout. They knew the vault combination, had timed their entry to coincide with shift change. They had disabled specific security systems. The technical precision pointed to significant planning and prior knowledge. Within 48 hours, the FBI had assembled a task force of 50 agents dedicated to the case. They began mapping known airport thieves and their associates, focusing particularly on organized crime figures with histories of similar operations. One name that repeatedly surfaced was Jimmy Burke. He had been implicated in previous JFK cargo thefts, though never convicted. His associates were known to frequent Roberts Lounge in South Ozone Park, which became an early surveillance target. The investigation received its first major break when a Lufthansa employee recalled seeing a suspicious black van parked near the employee entrance in the days before the heist, seemingly conducting surveillance. A partial plate number was recovered, leading investigators to a vehicle that had been reported stolen 3 days before the heist. While the van itself had been destroyed, forensic teams discovered trace evidence at the burn site in Canarsie. This location connected to known associates of Burke, though nothing conclusive could be established. By the end of December, the FBI had compiled a list of approximately 24 suspects, with Burke's crew featuring prominently. However, physical evidence remained scarce. The robbers had been meticulous about leaving no fingerprints. DNA was not yet used in criminal investigations, and no weapons had been recovered. The investigation would require old-fashioned detective work, informants, and patience. What the FBI didn't yet know was that the biggest threat to the perfect heist was oncoming from law enforcement. It was coming from within the crew itself. The prosecution and legal aftermath. The legal aftermath of the Lufthansa heist proved as complex as the crime itself. Despite having identified most of the perpetrators, prosecutors faced enormous challenges in bringing them to justice, specifically for the airport robbery. The first significant conviction came in May 1979 when Louis Werner was found guilty of providing inside information that facilitated the heist. Werner received a 15-year sentence in federal prison, though he served only 8 years before being released on parole in 1987. His cooperation with authorities, while helpful in establishing the initial connection between the inside information and Burke's crew, proved insufficient to build cases against the primary perpetrators. Peter Grunwald, the other Lufthansa employee implicated in the crime, received a reduced sentence of 4 years in exchange for his testimony. However, his knowledge was limited to conversations with Werner rather than direct contact with Burke's crew, making his testimony less valuable than prosecutors had hoped. The investigation hit a persistent roadblock in building cases against the actual robbers, due to Burke's ruthless elimination of potential witnesses. By 1980, nearly everyone with direct knowledge of the heist was dead or missing. Those still alive maintained strict silence, knowing that cooperation with authorities meant certain death. FBI agent Richard Woods expressed his frustration in a 1980 internal memo. "We're investigating murders to solve a robbery, then investigating more murders that resulted from investigating the first murders." Burke's created the perfect criminal firewall. The breakthrough finally came through an unexpected channel. In April 1980, Henry Hill was arrested on narcotics trafficking charges. After a multi-year investigation into cocaine distribution operations he'd established independently of Burke, facing a potential 25-year sentence, and aware that Burke was eliminating Lufthansa connections, Hill made the unprecedented decision to cooperate with authorities. On May 27, 1980, Hill and his family entered the Federal Witness Protection Program, one of the highest-profile cases in the program's history. During a series of intensive debriefing sessions lasting over 350 hours, Hill provided detailed information about Burke's criminal enterprises, including peripheral knowledge of the Lufthansa planning and subsequent cover-up. Jimmy was so paranoid about Lufthansa that he started killing everyone who knew anything, Hill told investigators. "I was next on his list, I know it. He'd already stopped talking to me, was giving me the cold shoulder. That's how it started with everyone else." Hill's testimony proved invaluable in building cases against Burke, though not directly for the airport robbery. Instead, prosecutors used a legal strategy focused on the murders that followed the heist. In 1982, based significantly on Hill's testimony, Burke was convicted of the murder of Richard Eaton and sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. This conviction effectively removed Burke from criminal circulation. But frustrated investigators and prosecutors who had worked tirelessly on the Lufthansa case. "We got Al Capone on tax evasion and Jimmy Burke on a single murder," remarked Assistant U.S. Attorney Edward McDonald. "Sometimes you have to settle for what you can prove beyond reasonable doubt, not what you know to be true." With Burke imprisoned, prosecutors turned their attention to his surviving associates. Angelo Seep was indicted for participation in the Lufthansa heist in 1984, but was murdered in his home alongside his girlfriend before the trial could begin, reportedly by members of the Gambino crime family settling unrelated grievances. Several of Burke's lower-level associates received convictions for crimes connected to the aftermath of the heist. Thomas Agro received an 8-year sentence for obstruction of justice in 1984. Frank James Burke was convicted of conspiracy charges related to drug distribution in 1985. Several bookmakers connected to the money laundering operation received sentences for tax evasion and racketeering. Burke himself received additional convictions for other crimes, including a 1985 conviction for involvement in Boston College basketball point-shaving schemes that extended his sentence to multiple life terms. He died of lung cancer at the Roswell Park Cancer Institute in Buffalo, New York, on April 13, 1996, while still serving his sentence at the Wend Correctional Facility. He was 64 years old and had never revealed the location of his share of the Lufthansa money. The case remained officially open and active for decades. In 2014, 36 years after the heist, prosecutors made one final attempt to bring participants to justice when they indicted Vincent Asaro, a 78-year-old Bonanno crime family captain who had never before been connected to the robbery. The case against Asaro emerged from an unrelated investigation when his cousin, Osper Valenti, became a government witness in 2008. Valenti recorded conversations in which Asaro allegedly discussed their involvement in the Lufthansa job, claiming he had received a share of approximately $750,000 but had been shortchanged by Burke. During Asaro's 2015 trial, prosecutors presented evidence that he had helped plan the heist alongside Burke, selecting key personnel and providing mafia approval for the operation. Despite this testimony and recordings, the jury acquitted Asaro of all charges related to the robbery after deliberating for just 2 days, a reflection of the difficulties in prosecuting decades-old crimes with limited physical evidence and witnesses of questionable credibility. Following Asaro's acquittal, U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of New York officially designated the Lufthansa case inactive, though it remains technically unsolved. No one has ever been convicted specifically for participating in the actual airport robbery. As for the money, most of it disappeared into the criminal underworld. Despite extensive financial investigation, the FBI recovered only minimal amounts. Approximately $20,000 was found during a search of Burke's home in 1979, about $7,000 traced to Louis Werner's bank accounts. Roughly $180,000 in cash was discovered in various safe deposit boxes connected to Burke's associates. Some jewelry items recovered from fences in Manhattan's Diamond District. The remainder, over $6 million in cash and valuables, effectively vanished. Financial investigators believe Burke laundered significant portions through legitimate businesses, while other amounts went to higher-ups in the Lucchese crime family as tribute. The legacy and cultural impact. The Lufthansa heist entered criminal folklore as the perfect crime that wasn't. While the heist itself had been executed flawlessly, the aftermath became a cautionary tale about greed, paranoia, and betrayal that continues to fascinate the public nearly 5 decades later. The robbery fundamentally changed airport security protocols worldwide. In direct response to the heist, the Federal Aviation Administration and international aviation authorities implemented comprehensive reforms. Biometric access controls for secure areas, enhanced background checks for all cargo personnel, armored transport requirements for high-value shipments, randomized delivery schedules to prevent predictable patterns, compartmentalized information systems where no single employee could access all security details at JFK specifically. The Port Authority Police Department established a dedicated high-value cargo security unit that continues operating today. The case also prompted improved cooperation protocols between federal agencies and local police departments for major interstate crimes. The Lufthansa heist achieved immortality in popular culture. When author Nicholas Pileggi chronicled Henry Hill's life and the robbery in his 1985 true crime book, Wise Guy, which Martin Scorsese adapted into his seminal 1990 film Goodfellas. The movie portrayed the robbery and its violent aftermath with remarkable accuracy, introducing a new generation to the story of Jimmy Burke and his crew. Ray Liotta, who portrayed Henry Hill, captured the criminal's conflicted perspective on the aftermath. Jimmy had never been so happy as when he pulled the Lufthansa heist, but within months he was ordering hits on everyone connected to it. It got to be crazy. The film's portrayal of Burke's growing paranoia and the subsequent murders aligned closely with Hill's actual testimony. Though some timelines were compressed for dramatic effect, the famous scene where Burke becomes suspicious of his associates spending telling them, "What did I tell you? Don't buy anything, don't get anything," came directly from Hill's witness statements. In the decades following the heist, several documentary series have explored the case, including A&E's The Lufthansa Heist and the Netflix series The Big Heist, which featured interviews with retired investigators and relatives of the participants. The robbery's mystique has been enhanced by the missing millions criminal treasure that may still be hidden in safety deposit boxes, buried in undisclosed locations around New York, or secreted in overseas accounts. Various theories have emerged over the years that Burke converted much of the cash to gold bullion buried on properties he owned in upstate New York, that significant portions were smuggled to Ireland through Burke's connections with the Irish Republican Army, that Burke's wife, Mickey, who survived him by many years, maintained access to hidden caches of the money, that Paul Vario, the Lucchese family capo, who oversaw Burke's crew, seized most of the money for the family. Henry Hill, who lived under witness protection until being expelled from the program for continued criminal activity, frequently gave interviews about the case before his death in 2012. In his final years, he claimed Burke had confided in him about hiding money where the sun doesn't shine, supposedly a reference to drainage culverts beneath properties Burke owned in Queens. The case even spawned a cottage industry of treasure hunters, who still occasionally appear at properties formerly owned by Burke or his associates, seeking permission to search for buried loot, usually without success. Perhaps the most significant legacy of the Lufthansa heist is its status as the last of the great traditional American robberies. In the decades that followed, technological advances in security, surveillance, and financial tracking made such heists increasingly difficult. Modern criminal enterprises shifted toward cybercrimes, identity theft, digital bank fraud, less dramatic but ultimately more profitable criminal ventures with reduced physical risk. The Lufthansa heist represents both the high water mark and the beginning of the end. For a particular brand of American organized crime, the robbery's planning and execution showcased the technical expertise and organizational ability of traditional mafia crews, while the bloody aftermath demonstrated the instability and self-destructive tendencies that ultimately undermined them. As former FBI agent Richard Woods reflected in a 2018 interview, the Lufthansa heist was both the greatest success and the ultimate failure of organized crime in that era. They pulled off an incredible robbery, but destroyed themselves in the process. In the end, the only real winners were the few who kept their mouths shut and stayed far away from Jimmy Burke and his blood money. The final pieces. In December 2013, while investigating an unrelated cold case murder, FBI agents conducted a search at the Queens home of James Jimmy, the Gent Burke's daughter, Catherine Burke, using ground-penetrating radar. They detected anomalies beneath the concrete basement floor. After obtaining a warrant and excavating the site, investigators made a grim discovery: human remains buried in the soil. Forensic analysis identified the remains as those of Paul Katz, who had disappeared in 1969, as being suspected of cooperating with police regarding an earlier Burke robbery. While not directly connected to the Lufthansa heist, the discovery reopened interest in Burke's broader criminal career and demonstrated his long history of eliminating potential witnesses. This renewed investigation led to the surprising 2014 arrests of Vincent Asaro, the previously mentioned Bonanno family captain. During his trial, prosecutors presented evidence suggesting that multiple participants in the heist remained alive, but untouchable due to lack of evidence. Though Asaro was acquitted, the case revealed that the FBI had never truly closed the books on Lufthansa. In 2018, documentation related to the heist was included in the FBI's declassified records collection, providing researchers and historians with unprecedented access to the investigation's details. These records confirmed what many had long suspected, that investigators had identified most of the participants, but simply couldn't build prosecutable cases against them. The most tantalizing revelations came from financial investigation records, which showed that the FBI had traced money flows suggesting that portions of the stolen cash had moved through accounts in Switzerland, the Cayman Islands, and Ireland in the years following the heist. However, banking secrecy laws and the passage of time prevented further tracing of these funds. As for the stolen jewelry, some pieces were eventually identified at various points in the diamond pipeline. Particular 18-karat gold Patek Philippe watch that had been part of the heist surfaced at an auction in Geneva in 2004, selling for €85,000 to an anonymous collector apparently unaware of its notorious provenance. Today, the Lufthansa heist remains technically unsolved. No one was ever convicted of the actual airport robbery, though the web of murders that followed sent several perpetrators to prison. Of the estimated $6.75 million stolen, less than $500,000 was ever recovered. The case stands as both a criminal masterstroke and a cautionary tale, perfect heist undone by imperfect human nature. The technical brilliance that allowed Burke's crew to execute the robbery flawlessly couldn't overcome the greed, paranoia, and betrayal that followed. As Henry Hill famously observed in his final interview before his death in 2012, Jimmy was a genius, the smartest guy I ever knew. But in the end, he couldn't trust anybody, not even himself. The money was a curse. Almost everybody who touched it ended up dead. The Lufthansa heist endures in American criminal mythology not just for the breathtaking amount stolen or the meticulous planning involved, but as the perfect illustration of criminal hubris, of reaching too far, taking too much, and ultimately self-destructing in spectacular fashion. Somewhere, perhaps some of those millions remain hidden blood money waiting to be found. The last tangible legacy of the most infamous airport robbery in American history. Subscribe to this channel for this and more captivating stories.